Okay, hello again. Here we are for the second session of our webinar looking at the EU, Japan, India cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. I'm Céline Pajon. I'm the colleague of Eva Peshova running the Japan program at the VUB. I'm very happy to welcome you. So for this session, we are dealing with a very big topic, which is the connectivity. Connectivity in itself is very huge. It encompasses hard infrastructure, but also digital infrastructure, soft aspect of it. So as you know, connectivity is really crucial. It's really at the core of what form exchanges and connectivity and prosperity of the countries of the region, and what allows the country to deal together, to exchange together, and also to form some corridors between Europe all the way to East Asia in a way. But connectivity is not only that, it's also the object of a kind of geopolitical competition for some times now. So the China has launched its Belt and Road Initiative back in 2013, which is basically a huge plan for infrastructure building, infrastructure financing in the region. And as we know, the EU, Japan, and India have all been very willing to kind of provide alternative to the BRI, and to join force also to support and build the infrastructure in the region. Indeed, we can see obvious synergies and convergence. If you look at Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific and Partnership for Quality Infrastructure, the India's Act East policy and other initiative, and the EU Asia Connectivity Partnership, which has its declination in a way and give birth in a way to the EU Japan Connectivity Partnership, and the newly minted just this weekend, we had the EU India Connectivity Partnership. So this is very interesting. You can really see this kind of network of the link between the three players. So one key question that we will be asking this morning is how to articulate these various initiatives, and how to articulate this EU, India, and Japan connectivity partnership all together. What are the challenges and so on. And beyond that, the COVID-19 crisis also highlighted the importance of fostering the cooperation on critical technologies, but also ensuring the resilience of the supply chains, production chains, and also developing a coordination in health sector. So all these areas have been discussed in the recent EU-India summit, but also within the Quad, and also during the G7 summit. So we will focus first on the connectivity, because a lot of many things to look at, and then we will also touch upon these other sectors during the discussion. And for this, I'm very happy to have three really great speakers with us today. First, we have Maike Okano-Eichmann. She's a senior research fellow with the Klingendal Institute in The Hague. She's really a top-notch expert on the connectivity issue, especially the digital connectivity. She wrote a lot of very good reports, including a very recent one on the EU connectivity strategy in the Indo-Pacific. So look at it. And she will provide naturally the European perspective. Second, we'll have Ritika Pasi with us. Ritika is a Perth, US, Asia, Indo-Pacific Fellow and a visiting fellow with the Observer Research Foundation, the ORF, in New Delhi. And Ritika has been looking at the various connectivity initiatives in the Indo-Pacific, and she has also wrote quite a lot on this. So thanks a lot for joining us. And finally, Ipeita Nishida will provide the Japanese perspective. Ipeita is a senior research fellow with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and he has been working on a number of topics, including maritime security in the region, but also connectivity. So thanks a lot for being with us this morning, all three of you. So we will start shortly, and just before starting with a remark, I would like to remind our attendees to write down your questions for the speakers in the Q&A box, and do not wait until the last minute, because we have plenty to discuss. There is a lot of news also, so you might have also questions to try to better grasp what's going on right now. So without further ado, we'd like to ask Maike to take the floor for the initial remarks.
Thank you so much, Celine, and to VUB for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts in this webinar. I was very happy to find, first of all, that it's very timely with the EU-India connectivity partnership, of course, that you mentioned, just concluded last week, but also the Indo-Pacific strategy that was announced by way of the Council conclusions last month, and then, of course, also the fact that you actually diverge from a focus on maritime and traditional security issues to this connectivity field. So I really wanted to thank you for that, because I do believe that it's the maritime security field is where the voices from the region, from the Indo-Pacific, for greater European engagement have been the strongest. So it's only natural that we start, many webinars with that very topic, looking at what EU countries are doing. And of course, not just maritime security, but also maritime governance, as we just heard. But of course, I think there's this other sort of very contested area where there's much less debate being had. And this is equally important, I think. And that's, of course, the high-tech and the digital domains. So indeed, in discussing some of my thoughts on connectivity, I would like to focus indeed on the digital field, because, well, again, I think that is on land in a way the most contested field. So I'll be speaking from a European perspective. So that's a little bit of EU, a little bit of the Netherlands, because indeed I'm based in The Hague. And the EU is, of course, now positioning itself in the Indo-Pacific. The Netherlands itself has focused on cybersecurity, was one of the first countries recently to have a Netherlands in the Indonesia cybersecurity dialogue, for example. So I think there's quite a lot going on here that I would like to address. And this is basically giving a summary of and reflections on very rapidly moving developments in three fields. First of all, of course, connectivity. But second, very much related, is the Indo-Pacific. And third is the digital domain. Now, in the digital domain, for any of you interested, do have a look at the 2030 Digital Compass that was published last month. It's a valuable document because it's really sketches the EU objectives, both internally and externally, in the digital field as we go through this digital transformation. One element of it that I will discuss in a bit more detail in just a minute is the human-centered approach that is focusing on digital solutions that help individuals and that protect individuals and that create greater resilience of individuals. And I think this is very much in line with what Japan has also been doing. So it's wonderful to be in this panel with a Japanese speaker. And then, of course, also with an Indian speaker, because India is where much of the excitement is happening these days, with a rapidly booming digital economy, the Data Protection Act that's still being discussed, that will also set the tone for India's contribution in multilateral settings. So I'm really looking forward to hear from those experts also, and to look at how we can create synergies and coordinate and perhaps even cooperate in this very important field. So the digital domain is one. Connectivity, just to summarize, of course, in Europe, it gained swing in 2018. It was, of course, in a way responding to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which was started many years earlier, but it was much more than that. It was really also Europe's contribution to this field, and it's focusing on inclusivity. And that's, of course, reminiscent of what we just heard in the previous session. And now at this point of time, because the focus of the connectivity strategy was initially EU-Asia, it's now being globalized. And I think that's also in line with some of the developments that we've seen. For example, when the EU and Japan concluded their connectivity agreement in 2019, the focus was on 3 areas, geographical areas. It was the very first time that the EU mentioned Indo-Pacific in an official document. So that's one area, but also Africa and Central Asia. And of course, a Japanese foreign minister traveling Eastern Europe, close to Central Asia, was, I think, also an indication of Japanese willingness to engage with us. So perhaps at the next occasion, we could also be discussing not the Indo-Pacific region, but closer to sort of Europe's backyard, rather than Japan's backyard or China's backyard, if you will. So then last weekend, the EU-India partnership on connectivity as one of several outcomes of that highlight summit. I thought what was striking there was that digital was mentioned first as one of the 4 domains of connectivity. It used to be that infrastructure was mentioned first, and then energy, and then digital, and then people to people. But it's striking that in this latest partnership, it was digital that came first. And again, I think that's only logical, considering the time frame we are in and the role that India plays and where India is at this point of time. Then just quickly, the Council conclusions on the Indo-Pacific. I think also here we saw quite a bit on security, cybersecurity, cyber governance, and in the Dutch Indo-Pacific guidelines that were published towards the end of last year, which gave impetus, of course, to this EU discussion. There was a focus on cybersecurity. So I think one of the key elements as the EU goes forward in engaging Indo-Pacific partners in this field is that we go beyond this sort of the security elements of the digital domain, digital connectivity, that we realize that there's great opportunities also in the digital economy. And there's standard setting and there's regulation that comes with the development of these digital economies that will be crucial and will also be defining the way that people can and are allowed to sort of engage with this digital domain. And that can be, of course, more restrained or more open. And I think that we share to different extents, as was also said in the previous session, with several like-minded partners, including Japan and India. The EU countries share this basic approach to wanting to have an open and inclusive and transparency. So this is important that we work towards these areas. So I think I've already said the words that I wanted to say about, why digital connectivity is important, but just to summarize, of course, these domains are increasingly contested, and China especially is trying to set different standards, exporting also it's what some people call digital authoritarianism. We see, for example, in Cambodia already a few months ago or a few weeks ago, I forgot, that they adopted a sort of China-style firewall, which I think, it was inspired by that country. So we definitely see the impact already of some of Chinese standards already going through the region. And I think it's to the benefit of all of us here that there's less of that and there's more of the European or the Japanese or Indian standards going out. So what can we do? This is also an attempt to, I think, reap economic opportunities that should be emphasized as a second sort of set of objectives, and the wish of Europe to help build sustainable digital economies. Because, of course, as I said, the Indo-Pacific is, I think, home to a very vibrant digital ecosystem where the European companies have not really been engaging with so much. Traditionally, the economic ties of European countries with countries in the Pacific, in the Southeast Asia, have been the strongest, stronger, of course, than security ties. But in the digital economy, I think there's slightly less of that. So we can sort of refocus in this domain. And of course, this also needs that we requires investments in research and innovation, because the fact that there's fewer fewer European companies active in the digital economies is also an indication of the fact that there's just fewer big tech from Europe. Of course, the big tech is dominated by Chinese companies and by American companies, and we see on sort of an uncomfortable position here because, well, as we all know, the sort of the state security-centered approach that Chinese big tech are promoting as they go abroad. And this contrasts, of course, with the surveillance capitalism, as it's sometimes called, of the United States big tech as they go abroad. I think that Europe and Japan want to find a sort of a middle way that allows individuals to take, to monitor and to still be in charge of all the data that they put out there if they go shopping or if they go socializing online. And I think for this way, it's important, for this reason, it's important that we also invest more in research and innovation, because it's really through by having companies that we can export also our standards abroad. The GDPR, the data legislation, I think, of Europe, that was, of course, a big highlight in where we did not need those companies to push for certain standards. I think many Europeans have been positively surprised by the way it's been welcomed and received and partially copied by countries, or at least has been an inspiration for countries in the region. I think we're doing the same now with AI regulation, artificial intelligence, where the EU is also preparing new guidelines on what is sort of ethical AI. How do we make sure that again, the individual interests remain center stage rather than those of the state or of a company. Through AI, where there's also important ways to regulate that. But again, as I said, I think there's also need for European companies to be more present, and perhaps in digital infrastructure, there's great opportunities. Because there's still a need for, I think, just broadband connection. So that's sort of linking to the hard connections. And on digital governance, there's also an opportunity. And capacity building, I think, is one other area, specifically digital financial inclusion. It's just amazing to see what has been happening in India. How people have been lifted out of poverty or have been able to go online and to develop themselves through digital financial inclusion. And I think that's an opportunity that perhaps European countries can help India to export also to third countries, because we know there's relatively little capacity for Indian actors to go abroad, but there's this huge technology base. That again, I think we can benefit, we can help third countries to benefit from by cooperating in trilateral cooperation. So that's just a few ideas of what we could actually be doing in this field. I can also think of, and to highlight how Japan and India are key partners in all of this. I could also highlight some of the challenges here, but I'll leave that perhaps to the Q&A and discussion, because I think I'm running out of time. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Maike. I think it was a great overview, and you did well to defend that the fact that the digital connectivity is actually key, that the core of things, and maybe one of the longer hanging fruits for the cooperation. But I will wait for the two other speakers to confirm that, or if they have another way. Thank you for raising the issue of data governance. Very recently at the G7 summit, we heard about the data free flow with trust, which is a concept pushed by Japan, actually. So I was wondering how the EU and India also position themselves vis-a-vis this concept. This is a question maybe for the discussion, and thanks a lot also for raising the question of how to engage the private sector, how to engage the companies to participate in this and to invest. And how also you mentioned the EU, the US China competition, the rivalry right now, and I'm wondering how its impact it can impact you know, this kind of initiative of EU, Japan and India. I can see that it's providing an opportunity, but maybe it's also constraining in a way things. So I would be interested to hear your view about it. So now we'll turn to India and to Ritika Pasi for a remark.
Thank you, Celine. And I would like to thank VUB for this opportunity. My comments are going to be broadly on connectivity as a whole area. To begin with, my first point is regarding this question of what is India's connectivity vision. India does not have a formal white paper out describing its approach, its vision. However, I think over the past few years, the direction of its approach and vision is becoming increasingly clear as the adoption of Indo-Pacific construct has become sharper in Indian foreign policy. Effectively, I see India's connectivity vision as a tool that is being utilized to pursue the Indo-Pacific construct as a free, open, inclusive region in common pursuit of progress, prosperity, and a rules-based order. Seen through this lens, a number of initiatives fall into place under this direction. There is, of course, the already existing IORA, which has recently inducted France as a member. Germany, Italy, and Japan are dialogue partners. There are, of course, a number of interest-based groupings, Quad, and we're all aware of the symbolism of it gathering steam at this particular moment, as the previous panel dived into. But more, I think it was a positive development to see the grouping find a functional footing through its cooperation, through the working groups that it has set up on climate change and high tech, and of course, vaccine cooperation. And of course, the Japan, India, Australia trilateral was mentioned in the previous panel as well, the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative that was formally launched this year. Then there are the wider Indo-Pacific initiatives. I have to here name the India-Japan-led Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, which was first announced in 2017. And I keep hearing that things are supposedly moving on this front. However, the pace has slackened off completely. India and Japan no longer even mention it formally. And the grand vision to connect Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Africa has instead given way to an emerging Japan-India collaboration in third countries, obviously at a far lower scale, but the lure of the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, it remains. In fact, to the point that there's already been conversation and discussion on how India, Japan, and the EU can cooperate in Africa. Then, of course, there is the International Solar Alliance, which was jointly announced by India and France. The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, the Indian initiative that now post this, the India-EU meeting, the EU has officially joined as a dialogue partner. And a last initiative that I'd like to mention in the context of this conversation is the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative that the Indian Prime Minister announced in 2019 at the East Asian Summit, which is an open, inclusive blueprint that is based on 7 pillars. And we've already seen participation from France, Japan, and Australia. Here, I have to emphasize or reiterate the point that was already talked about in the first panel, which is the importance that India gives to partnerships, right? And engaging in issue-based plurilaterals. India is seeking to actively co-opt a broader range of countries to not only provide, but also participate in emerging governance architecture in the Indo-Pacific that it itself is party to helping figure out. And this leads me to my second point regarding convergence between EU, Japan, and India. In the age of plurilaterals, this would be another great addition, I think, to an already existing overlapping network of issue-based partnerships that India is invested in. This one, however, could be more firmly embedded within the context of existing and planned bilateral cooperation among these three actors. In terms of connectivity, for example, there is a clear convergence around these four specific areas: transport, digital, energy, people to people, but also supply chain resilience, standard setting, as well as mobilizing private resources. More broadly, from an Indian perspective, I'd like to share a few common outlook, a few aspects of a shared outlook or common aims that make this particular collaboration or cooperation or this plurilateral more attractive for India. Even as the three actors may differ on what the regional order may look like in the Indo-Pacific, they all agree on the need for a balance of power. Enough said on that. The next is the fact that India would like to strengthen its role in the Indo-Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, and then more broadly in the Indo-Pacific, as a provider of regional public goods, as a provider of connectivity. Which better stakeholders to join hands with than Japan and the EU? They are strong infrastructure providers in their own right. Joseph Borrell, the High Representative of the EU, has in fact called the EU as a connectivity superpower. The fact that its development aid and investment is often understated across the world. Effectively, the three partners would be able to use bilateral and trilateral cooperation to amplify individual efforts and therefore their credibility effectively in this regard. And then, of course, India can more fully pursue the digital and green transformations along with the EU, which has been at the forefront of the green agenda, most recently visible under its new Green Deal, and Japan. A last point that I'd like to state here is the fact that India recognizes that both these actors, they in turn recognize they have an appreciation for India's role in the Indo-Pacific, right? Enhancing India's domestic capacity and resilience, as well as its economic modernization, is a key pillar of India-Japan and India-EU relationship. The active understanding is crucial that the more that India builds and solidifies its comprehensive national power, the greater its competitiveness and credibility and credentials as a major Indo-Pacific player and rule setter. When we talk about the way forward, how can these three players, what shape and form this trilateral could take? There are a few considerations I think that need to be kept in mind going forward. And at the base of it all is effectively some divergence. The fact that interests do not always align and they do not always overlap, as well as the national context, the lens through which each of these countries or each of these regions and countries and blocks is engaging with each other. Domestic considerations are effectively evergreen. And today that is particularly obvious with respect to COVID-19. In the context of India, we know the situation at the moment, the longer the infection persists and the greater, the more drawn out, the slower the vaccination process is, the greater the lack of pace, attention, and resource deficit towards partnerships and international engagement. And I think this is a point that was also made in the first panel. But beyond this, the health of the country and its people is at stake, given the poor handling of the crisis and the consequences thereof. Rising inequality, poverty increase, a blow to India's informal sector, which accounts for half of India's $3 trillion economy, job losses. The gaps that this pandemic has thrown the door wider open to, these need to be addressed sooner rather than later. Predictability of domestic environment is key for international engagement. Otherwise, India will end up being neither a balancing nor a leading, but an absent power in the Indo-Pacific as it fights fires back home. Domestic considerations can also be seen in another context in terms of national regulations and economic nationalism versus a desire to collectively act and align policies. And this could impact what we popularly use the rules-based order, effectively beyond a conversation of international law and security considerations that the first panel discussed. There's the question of standards and norms. we have, for example, the recent conversation issue of waiving patents for vaccine development, vaccine know-how, as well as other drug manufacturing. This issue of IPR is also, to this we can add the issue of worker mobility that has previously hamstrung India, EU trade and investment negotiations. When we talk about science and technology, engaging in high tech, ensuring supply chain resilience of critical materials, when we talk about data protection and privacy standards that Maike, you raised, consensus on these may prove a little bit more elusive than we may think, the more granular the level of cooperation and conversation becomes. Effectively, it's going to boil down to managing national regulations and economic nationalism versus a desire to play ball. And I do believe that the restarting of the trade negotiations between EU and India, it will be a kind of barometer for the willingness to compromise and negotiate when it comes to hardwired rules and national interests. So we'll see. A last issue, sort of following the thread on this issue of national interest in domestic contexts. We often talk about, that especially when it comes to connectivity, transport connectivity, infrastructure connectivity specifically, and now this conversation on supply chains, there has to be an economic rationale for pursuing, for changing, for building these connections. I'd like to say that it has to be acknowledged that the economic rationale of these three actors as they engage with one another is not going to be the same across the board. And this, I think, refers a little bit to, Celine, the question that you had asked about, US-China ties. Each of these actors and how they engage with US and China and how that can impact cooperation among these three actors. This perhaps will come out a little bit stronger in supply chains because the dependence level of each of these actors is obviously not the same across the value chain, across various value chains. And I'm going to end with now a very brief comment on trilateral cooperation that I'll be happy to develop in the question and answer round. Of course, immediate coordination and collaboration on COVID response and recovery. But in terms of a longer view, because the bilateral impulse is already strong between these three actors, this particular trilateral, could it focus on structural cooperation that can help build into a bigger network of like-minded actors as they engage on connectivity? The US President Biden has already reached out to UK's head, to talk about an alternative to BRI. And there's often this tension that we see between filling in gaps versus having an ambitious answer to China's BRI. Could this particular trilateral provide some momentum in gathering force among these three actors, but also developing linkages with other players? If India's bilateral engagement with EU and Japan focus more on India's domestic infrastructure connectivity and bilateral connectivity, which I absolutely endorse, then perhaps this trilateral could take the conversation forward towards engaging beyond the bilateral, right? And here, to end with, I envisage three functions that can be fulfilled by this plurilateral, which can cross-cut engagement on several areas of connectivity and resilience. First is coordination. Coordination. I think that's key. Why? Especially because there is a proliferation of investments, of aid, development cooperation, of initiatives that each of these countries is starting out. Each of these actors has set up, is engaged in, is planning to engage in. So the idea is to pull together, to collectivize information on unilateral initiatives, bilateral progress, especially as these countries often work in the same regions or countries of common interests. Multilateral coordination, not just at the WTO or G20, but also AIIB, where several EU members are members. The Indian Ocean Commission, to which India was recently admitted, but also the International Maritime Organization. The question should be, how can these actors connect with existing initiatives? The news that EU and India will collaborate in BIMSTEC countries as a first step towards collaborating in third countries, I think is a very positive direction to pursue. The second function that this trilateral should pursue is one of networking, right? And this, Mike, you've referred to in terms of, businesses, industries have to be in touch with each other, right? The idea has to be to facilitate access to people, businesses, finance. And here, taking from what you said, Mike, I would then also add skills, right? Which these clusters, if they are to engage with each other, can potentially provide. How about, for example, a business corridor or a finance corridor by promoting linkages between effectively existing businesses and industrial clusters and financial institutions in geographies of common interest, like Africa. Here I'm going to reference the Japan-India platform for business cooperation in Asia and Africa, for example, that commentaries have commented on and said that there is a role that, there's potential engagement with other countries there. And lastly, here I'm going to be very brief, and I'm going to reiterate Mike here, the function to innovate. This is going to be crucial to create sustainable economies going forward. The answers have to come from these countries, from these stakeholders. The idea would be to discuss and brainstorm what 21st century solutions these three actors can advance, right? Whether it's in terms of intensifying clean energy transitions, digital transitions, here the importance effectively of digital connectivity, even as simple as providing a broadband connectivity, for example. And I'm gonna end here for the moment.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rikita. I think it was a really terrific presentation. You said a lot of things. You touched upon a lot of different dimensions and elements. And thanks a lot for raising very concrete suggestion, recommendation. I think with Mike, we can already set up a kind of roadmap for the trilateral. So that would be a very great, addition contribution for the relation. So now I will turn to Ippeita-san for the Japanese perspective on this.
Okay, thank you very much, Celine. Can you hear me, by the way? Yes, good. Thank you once again to Celine and the VUB Japan program for inviting me to this great, exciting discussion indeed. What I'm going to talk about is basically the three folds. One is to talk about the basic economic rationale of Japan on the corridor businesses. The second is how Japan responded to this COVID and the supply chain issues. The third, I would briefly touch on the issue of the cybersecurity collaboration, and then sporadically I will come to some of the issues, potential areas of cooperation. Now, remember the key, one of the message from the Ambassador Shimokawa on the FOIP. We have three pillars in the FOIP. One is the rule of law. The second is economic prosperity, and the third is the peace and security. And most of the time, the FOIP is sort of translated to be understood as sort of strategic initiative against China. But what is laying behind is really economic needs for Japan to be engaged in this Indo-Pacific region. And this is way before 2007. I mean, it's a really structural issue that Japan needs to be engaged in this region because we still rely on the Middle East for 87% of crude oil production. Now, that is really the fundamental, and it was more or less the economic needs. But for the 2010, it has become more strategic because of the China's expansion and the regional inclusion into the area, right? So that is one of the issues. The SLOC maintenance and the regional order is one of the most important factors for the economic prosperity and the vital for the Japan's security. Now, the second thing is, as you know, the Japan is aging. Population is a serious issue. We are not seemingly not integrating the immigrants. So it is estimated by the World Economic Forum that we will lose about 20% of workforce by 2040. So we are not going to have enough production capability and enough demand, domestic demand to sustain the current level of the economy. So we need to look for the other opportunities abroad. That is a driving factor, another driving factor for why we need to be engaged so deeply into the corridor businesses, because it opens our market potential, and also the sourcing of opportunities, and to lower the cost, and to have more engagement in region to facilitate our economic activities. So we really need to understand those, the basics to understand the Japanese intention on the corridor business. Now, when we look at the Japanese idea on the corridor development, from 2013, there has been a ministerial level discussion on infrastructure export strategy and economic cooperation. And this is one of the most comprehensive discussion that Japan has been doing on the corridor, the connectivity. So they've been doing like EA discussions and making the strategies, but it is really needed. I mean, Japan is engaged in Southeast Asia, there is a distinct differences between how Japan wants to engage in Southeast Asia and the South Asia and Africa. They're two different aspects. Japan sees Southeast Asia as the growth center. That is an area where our businesses and industries are really engaged in, where they can the industries, the basic infrastructure, and the legal systems and bureaucracy are functioning very well for our supply chain. While India and East Africa are less so, and I think the Japanese government was really trying hard to have the engagement with India on the in India market. But so far, with some exceptions like Suzuki, not many of the companies are succeeding into getting into the base market. So now with the geostrategic interest, Japan is really engaged with India on helping their corridor businesses in northeastern region, and also the Gulf, the Bay of Bengal region's connectivities. So two of the largest Japanese ODA recipients, India and Bangladesh, that is shows how important these regions are for the strategic reason. Now, going to South Asia and Africa, so these two regions are important, and Japan wants to be engaged. However, we are seeing much less opportunities for the Japanese companies to penetrate at this moment. So they're trying to use those infrastructure development and ODA to be engaged, to build the bilateral relationship, to have market opportunities, and to hoping to change effect on the legal systems, so that and the infrastructure, so that the Japanese company can later join into the development. Now, when I can change the topic to the COVID and how connectivity. The COVID, as in India and the EU, had hard impact on the Japanese supply chain, especially in the auto industry and the industrial machinery and the electric suppliers. And one of the reasons because of the semiconductors, as you know, right? Because about 60% of the semiconductor fabrication or contracted manufacturing is in Taiwan, and we rely on Taiwan for those securing those the very key components. Now, so we really had a difficulty, and I think the auto industry is still struggling because the semiconductor for auto industry is quite cheaper, so the priority is much lower. So one of the things the Japanese government is trying to do is setting up the new supply chain resilience. I think the lecture talked about the supply chain initiative, Australia, Japan, and India. That is, they don't explicitly say, but what they're trying to seek is to have semiconductor and other key suppliers networking. So they're starting to have the forum of the business exchanges. And another issue is another initiative taken by Japan and the US and EU is on Taiwan. On September 2020, the three representatives gathered together in Taiwan to have the forum on supply chain restructuring, mainly to discuss about how the two countries and one entity can jointly discuss about the future of the supply chain, relating to the semiconductor business. So these are really important steps. And we saw it is quite surprising that for us to see EU to engage in Taiwan business to this level. And this could be one of the forum, whereby India could, also join as a stakeholder, because this forum is open to other like-minded partners as well. Now, another thing is the Japan is trying to do is the diversification of the sourcing for the Japanese industries. So in the April 2020, as early as April 2020, 1 year ago, the Japanese government was quick to react to have the joint declaration with ASEAN on economic resilience action plan. And they have come up with like 50 plans for the to make a resilient ASEAN supply chain, including financial incentive for Japanese companies to relocate their facilities and the industry bases into the Southeast Asian countries. So these are big, and this is actually it's one of the China Plus One movement that Japanese government is supporting, to have the wider the sourcing possibilities. Now, let me just touch on the connectivity. Again, Southeast Asia is really important for us. And Southeast Asia can be the backdoor for the soft supply chain target, right? So Japanese government is engaged with ASEAN on the capacity building, and can also to have the intersession meeting in the ASEAN Regional Forum, so that they can have much more awareness and the capability to handle the cyber attacks by themselves. Now, this is another area, of course, where the India and the EU can jointly work together with Japan. Of course, as Mike said, so which, at which background are we going to work on? We have to be questioned. But then, it is the area of the Japanese interest in the Southeast Asia. Now, lastly, I would touch on some of the areas for the Japan-EU-India collaboration, sort of a new type of the mini-lateral. I think the two speakers, earlier speakers, agreed that we really need to have the standard setting collaboration, right? And we had the forums such as G7, G20, and Richter talked about other forums. But if you remember, I think India is to have the chairmanship in the G20 in 2023, right? 2 years on, and that G20 is a troika-ship. So India is actually going to engage in agenda setting for next year on G20, right? And it is really important that the three powers get together to work on the issues that we have been talking about, or the digital transparency, the standard setting, and also the electric commerce, as well as the health issue. Because hopefully by 2023 we overcome with the COVID and try to normalize our relationship, and in the future, right? So it's going to be like a really a time for the next stage collaboration, and we have 2 years to go on, and I think we have ample time to collaborate. But more in detail, I think this relates to the one of the discussion in the earlier session. I think there is much of the interest for the EU, India, and Japan to collaborate on the anti-terrorism, non-proliferation, and arms control in the Indian Ocean region. Indian Ocean region is still not guarded well. I think especially after the US pullout from Afghanistan, we really don't know what's going to happen, right? And India is already doing the maritime domain awareness cooperation with France on the on Arabian Sea. But what about the other side? Gulf of Bay of Bengal, or including the land connectivity. I think there is much of the opportunities for possibilities that the three can get together to have a consultative mechanism for the information sharing on the risk assessment, on the people movement, and such in this area. And another thing is, as I said, I think there's much possibility or opportunities if the India EU agrees to invite India to join the discussion that we have on the sensitive supply chain issues in Taiwan. I think that will hold, that will send some strong message globally, and also if we can co-finance some of the major diversification of the industry basis to other countries. I don't know if it's going to be India or not. It could be an interesting opportunities as well. The cooperation in cyber domain, I think Yoshitake-san also mentioned. I think the EU is working really hard on disinformation in the European, during the electric campaigns. Unfortunately, we have not experienced that in Japan yet, but we expect that similar thing will happen soon in this, East Asia context. So if India, Europe, and Japan can share the respective disinformation on knowledge and experiences, that will probably foster a further collaboration of other areas. And lastly, just to touch on the health issues, well, the G7 foreign ministers talk, I totally support their joint declaration to support Taiwan's fair participation in WHO and WHA, because it's really needed to have that entity to be brought into the discussion of the maintaining the global health. And also I found the Quad new approach was really interesting to finance and provide logistics for the medicines to be being produced in India to be provided to other countries, right? Well, I think EU and Japan also has similar understanding how health is really important for the development in the less developed countries, right? I think the two can jointly do the similar, have a similar scheme to provide finance and logistics, so that to provide the capitals to the Indian generic medicine providers, so to be used for the the global pool. I think that is the fair way of the working together. So those are small things that I thought which came up to my mind to collaborate for these three. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for presenting the broader Japanese approach to the connectivity, to the various initiatives in the region, including with ASEAN and so on, and also to point out to other possible convergence and area of cooperation, even reaching out and going in broader domain like security or disinformation and so on. So now we are turning to the discussion and Q&A. We have a few questions, but don't be shy. Do not hesitate to write down your questions. I have a few myself, so I will mix them all together and maybe take the opportunity to start with the question that was asked during the first panel. And I will ask Maike on this. So the question reads, EU's connectivity concept is open and inclusive. So does the EU have a plan to conclude a connectivity partnership with China at some point? Maybe also in a perspective to try to have a kind of influence, try to shape how China is actually implementing its BRI. It's quite an interesting question because, as you remember, back in 2018, I believe, Prime Minister Abe from Japan also reached out to China and discussed the possibility under a lot of conditions, but the possibility for Japan to actually cooperate with China on the BRI. So is it something we can think about in EU, in Japan? Do you see, Ipeita-san, any progress on this? Have you seen any concretization of this of this cooperation? Do you think it is realistic or not? And Ritika, do you see that? Do you think that India would be actually willing to adopt this kind of approach, or do you think it would be actually very, very complicated for many reasons? If you agree, I will list several questions and then come back to you, and maybe. To build on this question, one is how to engage with China on this connectivity issue. And you mentioned a lot of regional and multilateral initiative, multilateral organization in which the connectivity initiative are discussed or should be plugged in or should be articulated. But nobody's mentioned the Asia-Europe meeting, the ASEM, summit. So why is that? No. Do you see any value to the ASEM summit? Do you see it as providing a useful platform to build up a kind of coordination, greater coordination between the three players, or to try to identify a specific project? Or would it be a useful platform actually to engage with China on some of the connectivity project? So maybe I would start with there's one, and then we'll move on. Who wants to start? Maike? Yep.
Sure. Yes. Thanks. Asia-Europe meeting and EU-China. Happy to tackle those two questions, and I'll try to be short, but that will go at the expense of some of the nuances. So bear with me. On EU-China connectivity cooperation, I think, well, as anything that the EU does, it has to come from and to be endorsed by EU member states, right? So as with the Indo-Pacific strategy, was France, Germany, the Netherlands that pushed for broad discussions at the EU level, and then it happened quickly. So the EU cannot really start if there's no push from the member states. And I think this has been lacking, this push. As concerns an EU-China connectivity partnership. Several reasons for that. EU member states have tried, of course. You must all be familiar with the fact that Italy became the first G7 member, as it was highlighted, to adopt that EU-China BRI MOU. And it was criticized for it because it sort of seemed to endorse the BRI in the way that China has been promoting it, whereas EU connectivity partnerships have been very normative. The focus has been on sustainable connectivity, on high quality infrastructure in the Japanese term. And of course, if you sort of want to engage with China, that should be in there. This normative element should be in there. So just endorsing BRI is not an option, but EU member states have been trying to engage China on the BRI, just not solely on China's terms. Less well known than the BRI MOUs, I think, are the third market cooperation MOUs. The Netherlands has signed one with China several years ago at the request of China. And I know the Netherlands is not just the only one. And this was sort of an alternative to this BRI MOU. So the third market cooperation MOU, I think Japan has a similar thing going, is about trying to link, well, in this case, Dutch and Chinese companies working together in third markets to promote connectivity and to get to know each other better, to sort of, yes, to see what can be done. So this is sort of engaging with the BRI, but not endorsing BRI. That was also the title of a piece that I wrote several years ago. So if you're interested, you can look that up. It's at the Klingendahl website. I think that has been sort of typical of the Dutch approach and of several other member states. And unfortunately, it has sort of failed. Nothing much has come out of this MOU. What I heard from Dutch officials is that China was pushing for a MOU. It turned to be out that this was sort of the one that both sides could agree to. And then after it was signed, after the ceremonial stuff, nothing much happened. And of course, this has to do again with differences in standards that play out if you go to specific countries. So perhaps, Nishida-san, if you could give us an update on, I think it was Thailand, where Japan and China tried this also, right? Also, nothing much seemed to be happening. But I think you cannot blame it on the fact that we have not tried. It just hasn't really borne fruit. So over to the Asia-Europe meeting. Yes, I think several years ago, also the European countries were very optimistic about connectivity cooperation in ASEM context. We had a connectivity pathfinder group. There had been tangible areas for cooperation on connectivity identified, 5 of them, I believe. But here, sort of the same thing happened as what I just described, that as countries try to move to sort of implement, to work out the practical details, the differences between several countries turned out to be too big. And nothing much has been happening. And I have to admit, I do believe that the EU is also not playing, a very, positive role in this, if in all honesty, because it's based on the realization that it's been very difficult to push this forward in this big multilateral context. So hence the turn to minilaterals, trilaterals, and issue-based coalitions, where we are now at.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to, Ritika? Yeah.
So I fully second Maike's comments, especially on the ASEM platform. In fact, I think both the questions can actually be combined a little bit from India's context in terms of collaborating with China. That boat has sailed, I think. And from the very beginning, in fact, India was the first country actor to verbalize formally discontent with the approach that is characteristic of BRI projects, and instead to push for an alternative approach that is based on its extensive experience in development cooperation, and in wanting to promote that, advance that, and strengthen that. But in terms of multilateral platforms, those are of course very open in terms of wanting to, the age-old agenda of wanting to push China towards the light, so to speak, in terms of liberalization, in terms of reciprocal market access, in terms of adopting standards with respect to its investments, sustainability parameters. And we've seen, for example, the increasing attention that China and BRI are now placing on the health Silk Road, or the digital Silk Road, or the green Belt and Road. But I think the approaches multilateral forums aside, I think the approaches of India and China are too divergent. And this is to say nothing of the bilateral relationship that at present effectively precludes any substantive cooperation, especially when it comes to an area where, again, the approaches are just vastly different.
Thank you. Nishida-san?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, on the third market collaboration with China, I think you're right, Margaret. I think we have the one successful the case in Thailand, the East-West corridor, I think. But I think China also issued I think the report on the guideline of how successful cases were with each countries, including Japan and some of the European countries. But I don't think they are really substantial or concrete cases. But there are, I think, working on had some cases. On talking about the ASEM, I also agree with the Mike's analysis. And from the Japanese point of view, what is the utility of having ASEM? Where we have to engage with each of the 27 countries in Europe, as well as EU and NATO, OSCE, and it's for Japanese bureaucracy. It is too many points of contact, and they want to simplify and try to find what is the strategic use of these channels, and it's really difficult for having the concrete result when there's so many stakeholders, right? So it's easy to have a smaller, like-minded countries like G7, or at least to have a common ground, or in a G20. So so those are the my view. But Japan is not coming back to China business. Japan is not really against the BRI. The AIIB is doing. There are alternatives for ADB, right? There's vast infrastructure needs, and ADB was not efficiently responding to the needs. So and I think it's also needed by the market, which is Southeast Asia, South Asia, and other countries. So I think that rather than try to deny China's activities, we should try to understand how they're behaving, which also I think each of the countries watching carefully, and try to engage with the businesses that they do. But on the bilateral level, Japan, the China is the largest trading partner still, right? And we cannot really detach them. Even after the corona, the 50% of the businesses say they are going to invest more in China. Even if the government says divert to Southeast Asia, they cannot do it, because the market is so big and the stake is so high. So I think that we really need, economic point of view, we need to live with China's the activities.
Excellent, thanks a lot. So now we'll move to the second batch of questions, and I will start with one question on India's roles in connectivity partnership, which is often seen to be that of an object rather than a subject. So there is Giulio Pugliese who is asking either of the speaker, but I guess it's this question is naturally for Ritika to provide some examples of illustration of maybe what India is already doing in terms of infrastructure, connectivity, capacity building, financing in its region, or maybe in Africa, and what is in the pipeline for the future. I also would like to ask all the panelists if you think that one of the first maybe easier area for coordination would be to imagine a kind of EU-Japan coordination in India to build up Indian domestic infrastructure to support digital connectivity or infrastructure, or do you think it would be interesting to look at third countries such as in Africa, in East Africa, in which we already have some joint initiative by Japan, India, and maybe also EU Japan. I have also a more specific question for Ipeta-san on the recent summit between Japan and the Visegrad Group, in which the Central Eastern Europeans expressed expectations for Japan cooperation in a 3Cs initiative focused on infrastructure development in energy, transport, and digital sectors in the region surrounded by the Baltic Sea, the Adriatic Sea, and the Black Sea. So how does Tokyo perceive this initiative, and in which concrete way do you see Japan would engage with that? And maybe another question from me, because the supply chain resilience initiative was mentioned. So it's a Japanese initiative working with India and Australia on this. So do you see any opportunity for the EU or some European countries to be plugged in this initiative? So the questions are first for Nishida-san and Ritika, but Maike, of course, you are welcome to jump in and to add your remarks, because we are almost at the end also of this discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Celine, for those questions. On the Japan reform, I'm sorry, that was off my radar. I was not taking a look very carefully on this initiative. But the Japan is constantly talking with the V4 on the possible collaboration, and I think the proximity of the V4 is getting closer because of the mutual interests arising. the China's entry into their region and the Russia's, their also their interest in Russia's activities in this region as well. So I'm sorry to say that now I cannot fully answer to the question, but then the discussion is going on, so there has to be some meaning in it. On the supply chain resilience initiative and Europe, I think there should be a room for the collaboration. They just started doing this new scheme and trying to have the each of the success cases and try to have some of the areas of the possible collaboration. And I think they're open to the other countries if they want to join. So it should be good. On the issue of the third country collaboration with India, Japan has been working since 2018, if I'm not wrong, in Sri Lanka, and also Bangladesh, right, on the financing and some of the projects. So, but they are making the progress, but I'm not too certain if the project is really succeeding integrated. If they could be like, the collaboration can be, take in many forms, right? And you can say like, we are collaborating, side by side. We are integrated, to collaborate. So I think we really need to look into the detail how, the two parts are collaborating and how other party can join the scheme. Because when it comes to like an ODA, there has been a discussion of the alignment of the official development assistance, but oftentimes the scheme is so different, and they couldn't come to agree on the concrete project to do together, right? Because of each of the ways of the working or the priorities and the method are different. So the aligning those schemes are quite difficult work, process. So rather than trying to find some concrete projects like that, I tend to agree with the Richter's view that they should start with the coordination, try to see what they can actually do together. And I think there is if there's a political momentum to do so, I think it's possible that they can sit together to narrow down what they want to actually progress. Thank you.
So to my intervention very briefly in terms of the question about India as a subject, effectively, what does India provide? 3 points. First, please look at India's neighborhood first activity, where India provides infrastructure, financing, loans, grants, in order for capacity building. That is a key example of the action that India has been taking and continues to take. There has been an increase in the pace and momentum of India's engagement in infrastructure connectivity around its immediate neighborhood. A second example is the activity of Indian private companies in Africa, and also a little bit now with third-party cooperation with Japan, for example, as Ipeta mentioned in Bangladesh. So the track record of Indian private companies in Africa has held up very, very well. In fact, that was one of the first sort of immediate, that was one of the more concrete considerations between India and Japan collaborating together. And it remains an open question, which continues to attract attention from Indian and Japanese business and industrial clusters on how to actually engage with existing presence of Indian companies and the soft skills that Indian presence has effectively acquired in areas such as Africa. A third, this is an example that I came across, and it also has to do with digital technology, so I thought it'd be interesting to share. OneWeb Global Satellite Network is a broadband satellite communications company. I was not aware of this, so to anybody who is already aware, apologies, I'm just gonna explain a little bit. It is run by a consortium that includes the UK government, an Indian private company, a European satellite operator, and some of its investment comes from Japanese SoftBank. They have signed an MOU with Kazakhstan to promote broadband connectivity in the country. And the first network demonstration is expected to be in June. This is an excellent example of private collaboration supported by government in the digital space in an area of common interest. And I think that effectively speaks to the potential, especially to build digital infrastructure, whether it has to do with teleeducation, telehealth, or indeed e-commerce and basic broadband connectivity. Oh, and the second question in terms of, absolutely, I think India at the moment is, I think, a perfect incubator. If we talked about innovation, for example, whether it has to do with digital technologies, strengthening and deepening broadband connectivity, which India, despite having the highest number of users at the moment, despite having a large market, it still lacks effective digital penetration across the country. So, you know, that would be a very that would be an excellent project if EU, Japan, and India were to coordinate a project to increase penetration of digital technologies in India. But I think here bureaucratic and operational challenges and implementation challenges may come to the fore. But I think the potential is absolutely there. And again, India as an incubator for several innovative, as an incubator as well as a test bed for any innovative pilot projects that companies can come up with, that research clusters can come up with. And here I think there is a strong need. Yes, the diplomatic aspect, the diplomatic shared diplomacy is critical at the coordination level, particularly, but when it comes to networking and innovation, that is where we actually have to let the research clusters, the business clusters, the startups are huge, right? We have to let them sort of take the lead in terms of what are specific areas of engagement in India or in third countries.
Excellent. Maike, do you want to react to that or?
Yeah, sure. Just very briefly, and following up on a point that I already made in my presentation. I think the EU and EU member states individually are all sort of trying to contribute to what you said, I think, Ritika, about lifting India's role and position in the region and also supporting its engagement with the region. And that's, of course, also a way of trying to balance the powers in the region. So there's been various examples of that. Indeed, France and the International Solar Alliance and the Netherlands also as well, you know, sort of an odd member to that club if you think of geographical positioning, but we became a member also for political reasons, I think. So that's one. And then there is the digital financial inclusion, where I think India is much more than an object, but very much sort of trying to lift India as a subject. And trying to export all the expertise that India has and to allow other countries to benefit from it. Perhaps a final point that has to do with, not with digital, but with more hard infrastructure in transport is waterways connectivity. I think that's a very promising area also, where you see inland waterways that India has been trying to develop. You could also develop cross-border, especially you know, in the northern regions. BBIN, of course, initiatives with Bhutan and Nepal and Bangladesh. I think there's much potential there. There's European expertise in waterways. There's Japanese expertise also. So that would be an opportunity for a trilateral, but probably more so in terms indeed of coordination rather than cooperation, because some of what I hear also from European players in the EU and in member states is the difficulty of working with very well established, very big and therefore bureaucratic Japanese players like JICA, that do a lot of good, but also, of course, have their own agenda. So trying to sort of get on board with that and to do joint projects, for example, as the EU was initially envisaging, has proven to be very difficult. That was, in our view, I think, part of that EU-Japan connectivity partnership. So trying to sort of, reframe that into something where we can coordinate and bring, these initiatives all together to a higher level.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Mike. We are now running out of time. We are actually behind schedule, which shows that the topic was broad and very, the discussion was very fruitful. And I thought it was very fascinating to get the three perspectives on this. And I think it really shows the value added of some of this, track 2 discussions to try to support the trilateral cooperation at the political level, at the institutional level. We really are quite efficient to raise some recommendation, to show, to point out to opportunities, to also show, highlight what are the potential challenges, because we should be aware also of the challenges to make the thing work in a very efficient way. So thanks a lot again for being with us, for the three great speakers, for the attendance and for the questions. And please stay tuned for the Japan program at VUB, because we are starting our third module of lectures on the Japan foreign and security policy, and we will touch upon the Japan-EU relation just tomorrow. So do not forget to register for that. Thanks again for all the panelists this morning, and have a good day. Have a good afternoon, have a good evening in Japan, and we are looking forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.